All right. Well, welcome everybody to the first episode of the Celestial Hub podcast. This is a little project that I'm starting here where I interview all sorts of people across the world who have had very interesting experiences with the spiritual and with anything that most people don't necessarily consider when it comes to all the possibilities that this life can offer us. So all sorts of spiritual experiences, paranormal experiences, supernatural experiences, and yeah, I'm just that's what I want to do. Just interview people and just spread the message that there is more to this world than what we can perceive with our five senses. So I'm here with Dan here, who's the first guest actually for the podcast, and who has some pretty interesting things to share that honestly I'm going to be discovering at the same time as everybody else because we don't know each other, but I guess soon we will know a bit more. So how are you today, Dan?
Hey, how are you? What's your name again?
I'm
I
Alec.
only know your username on Reddit. Alec, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Alec, and I'm doing phenomenal today actually. I love it.
Great. I'm a little tired. Worked this overnight shift last night, but I squeezed out enough energy to do this.
All right, well, thank you for being here. So I guess my first question, because you mentioned in the original post that I made, you mentioned having some prophetic dreams since you were 3 years old. So
hmm
maybe you can start by sharing like what is the first time that you remember having that, what happened, and how you got to understand that this was not just a regular dream.
Okay, so the very first time where I had this happen, I was about like three and a half, something like that, where, I actually remember what living life was sort of like. And I had this dream that I was standing at this gas station about like 5 minutes away from my house. And I was looking across the street at another gas station, and somebody pulled up and starts robbing the gas station. So, right there at three and a half, I was aware of what was going on. And I didn't really know why I was having the dream at first until the next day. Later on in the day, my dad got home at like 7:30 or something like that, and he said to my mom, "Oh, you're never gonna believe what happened last night. The gas station BP on Route 23 got robbed."
Hmm.
So I overheard him talking about that, and I was like, "Oh wow, okay, so there's something more to that than I originally thought."
Wow, that's quite fascinating. So you were not even at the scene that you foresaw before, and
No, I was just standing there, like as if I was looking through the eyes of somebody else,
so
maybe the gas station attendant.
so the time of the dream and the time that the actual robbery happened, does it correspond, or like was it so? In a sense, ultimately, I'm wondering if it's remote viewing that you were doing, or like was it before that you dreamed and then it happened?
In this case, I suppose it was because I was asleep at around like 10, and I think that's around the time that it happened. It was like
Yeah.
9:30, 10 or something like that. So, yeah, in that case, it was dead on. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, and you were so like young, right? So you were still aware of like what a gas station is and all of that at 3.5 years old. That's already kind of you were pretty aware.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy.
Interesting. So how did that like? Do you remember how you felt when you like understood that what you saw actually did happen? Do you like how did that affect you?
I thought to myself, "Oh, I'm not going to tell anybody about this."
Right.
And that honestly set the tone for my attitude towards it for a very long time. Is I'm not going to tell anybody because I think they're going to think I'm just making things up. It's my imagination, or
Mm-hmm.
this, that, or the other thing. And I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I
Okay.
think I tried telling my parents once about an experience when I was younger, and they wrote it off immediately, like, "Oh, he has an active imagination."
Right. Because yeah, 'cause that's the thing. That's the framework that we're raised with, right? Is that like the things that are happening in our imagination and the things that are happening in the dreams and all that, it's ultimately not real. But then when it is, it's like it creates this shadow of belief that is either accepted or just disregarded completely. And
Yeah.
I think honestly one of the reason of this podcast is ultimately to show people that it that because honestly there's a lot of people that have had some of these experiences that are not necessarily explained by the normal way of explaining things, and it gives people the possibility to to express themselves more and to be more confident in what happened to them, not think that they're crazy, not think that it's that they're all making it up. And because there's many people like us that have had crazy experiences like that. So thank you
Oh yeah.
for being here and for sharing. Now, you mentioned
You're
like
welcome.
that was the first one, and do you remember kind of the progression that happened after that? Was it like something that would happen every week, every month, a few times a year? Like what was the kind of frequency that these weird events occurred?
Um, Let me just touch on my general psychic abilities first, and
Sure.
so you can understand how it works for me.
Yep, definitely.
So, say, I'll be watching like The Simpsons or something, and there's like Bart and Homer and whatnot. What'll happen with me is I'll get into these trances, I guess you could say, and I'll start having these images come through my mind, and they'll be symbolic. Like, say I'll think about like Bart Simpson and like a gas station or something like that. Something so random, it doesn't make sense. But then say like an hour later or something, I'll go to a gas station and I'll happen to run into a guy and I'm talking to him and he's like, "Oh yeah, my name's Bart." You
Hmm.
know, some stuff like that. It'll happen all the time. Uh, so I'll have those day to day predictions or precognitions. The
Right.
dream ones happen on a timeline of a day to several years.
Sorry, what do you mean? Like the
Oh,
before the thing happens is what you mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll have a dream about an event, being somewhere, and this, that, and the other thing happens, and it'll either happen, the next day, weeks later, months later, years later. A lot of the times, it'll happen literally. Like I'll see somebody, their name's like John Jacob Jinkerheimer Smith, and I see them in the 7-Eleven and they're wearing, orange hat or something, and we're talking about dogs or something like, and then it'll happen exactly like that. At other times, it'll be I'm imagining something happening, say like, my friend's wasted and I pick them up from some location or whatever, and then that won't actually happen. But then, say I'll be talking to somebody soon after, and they're like, "Oh yeah, so and so was wasted at this bar, and I called you to drive him home." but I didn't answer the call, something like that.
Hmm. Okay, that's interesting. And has it happened? And because it seems to be pretty kind of random, from what I gather so far, do you have sometimes the ability to kind of consciously tap into that ability?
Yeah, it seems like for a long time I wasn't really tapped into it, and it would happen here and there. But then uh recently, in the past like 3 years, it's to the point where it's ongoing and almost constant in little ways, where it's not like I think I have the power to control the future and what everybody does, but I do think that I have the power to control what I do, and that according to whatever timeline, I'm most likely going to end up in a certain situation with certain people and whatnot. But I can, choose to act any way I want, right?
Right.
But it's like, how would I naturally act and go about it?
Okay, well, that's interesting because it kind of makes me wonder if you've ever had the like one of okay, well, let me just ask you something beforehand then, and then I'll move on to this question that I just had. But do you, like, when you have, for example, these prophetic dreams, do you know before that they get fulfilled? Is ultimately my point, is there a difference between a noticeable difference between the prophetic dreams and the normal regular dreams?
The prophetic dreams seem to be a lot more vivid, and they're in very bright, uh, almost waking color, and seem 100% real. They seem almost realer than real.
Right.
And when I wake up, I'm like, I want to go back there. Like, that was
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had dreams like that. And ultimately, the reason why I was asking this is, as it happened before that you had one of such prophetic dreams, but it was not necessarily something that you wanted to happen, and then you were able to act on it to kind of change things. Do you feel like that's possible, or as it happened?
um yeah, something like that did actually happen, where I had this dream before I moved to California from New Jersey, because I lived in California from 2019 to the beginning of 2021. I started having dreams in about like 2016, 2017 about moving to California and working at a certain location. I remember I was doing groundskeeping work at this small shopping mall, and I remember exactly how all the scenery looked and who the regulars were in the area and whatnot. And there was one particular dream where I was pruning these bushes, and I put my shears down on the ground, picked up the rake, and I'm picking up the leaves, and I'm sort of crouched behind this bush, and there's this guy on a bike who's slowly going past me, and I got the feeling he was going to say something, and he was like, "Hey, what, I'm going to come over there and smack you." And I'm
Hmm.
like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" I was like, "You're not going to smack me. Like, what the hell is going on?"
Right.
And I go back picking up the leaves and whatnot, and then I look up and I see him holding my shears, riding away with them.
Okay.
So I'm like, "Oh shit!" So he was just trying to, throw me off balance a little bit so he could steal the shears. And in the dream, I jumped over the bush, chased after him, pushed him off the bike, and he fell in the middle of the road. And I grabbed the shears and took off.
Okay.
So that happened. And then fast forward, 4 years or so, wind up at a groundskeeping job in Venice and Los Angeles, and it's in the same place and whatnot. And I'm in the grocery store, Ralph's, and I'm about to walk out, and I see this guy with tattoos all over him. And right away, I'm like, something about this guy's sketchy. I don't know what his deal is. And I see him. He gets on his bike and he starts patrolling around the parking lot like a vulture. He's trying to eye up his next victim.
Right.
So I go across the street back to my shed to get some tools because I was planning to prune the bushes. And in my head, I thought of this documentary that I watched one time of this psychopath in jail talking about his story and how he thinks and whatnot. And I immediately thought, like, okay, I'm thinking about this because that guy on the bike is super sketchy. And I should probably stay over here and not go over there and wait until he leaves. But
Hmm.
I completely disregarded it and I was like, whatever. So I go over there and start pruning the bushes and whatnot. And sure enough, he starts riding by, and I got the feeling he was going to start some shit. And he started yelling at me, saying he was going to come smack me. And I was like, no, you're not. And same exact thing played out. He's like, ha ha ha. And I look up and he's riding away with the shears. But I did not jump over the bush and chase after him and try to,
Right.
push him off the bike to get the shears back. Because in reality, I thought to myself, well, he could easily just call the police and be like, oh, this guy assaulted me. And,
Right.
I'd wind up in this big, like, legal entanglement, which I didn't want to get involved with. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal to lose like $35 shears and get a new pair. And even my boss said, like, that's exactly what I think you should have done, Dan. Like, I would have told you, oh, just let it go. It's not worth it. What if, he like slices your throat with the shears? Who knows?
Hmm.
So, yeah, but it
That's
would have
good.
been pretty cool if I was that heroic and threw him off the bike or whatever.
That's really interesting, but the when did you make the link with the dream that you had a few years prior? Was it like while it was happening or in retrospect?
Yeah, it was immediately after it had happened. And
Okay.
I know that I'm about to have the timeline replay because there'll be this feeling that'll wash over me. And it's happened so many times that it's predictable at this point. I'm like, oh, it's gonna happen again. Let's see. And sure enough, some dream that I had plays out, and it's always mind blowing whenever it happens, even though I'm
I
used to it.
bet. I mean, already what you just shared is pretty mind blowing. Like the reenactment. Now I'm kind of just wondering, like how if you've been able to ultimately to use that for something like because you kind of briefly mentioned something about the timelines earlier and choosing your own actions and things like that. Um, well, Wow, there's a lot of potential routes we could go here, but let me just ask you this then. It's like, how do you feel this can benefit you if you were to use it kind of consciously? Would you be able, for example, to kind of become lucid in your dream and create something in the dream that you then want to be created in your life? Do you think that would be possible, or have you done that?
Um, in the dream, it doesn't even feel like I would want to change anything. It just feels like natural. It exactly is how I would want it to be,
Okay.
if that makes sense. And uh, that thought doesn't cross my mind in the dream of, oh, how could I change this? Or how could this be different? It's almost like I'm just watching this movie play out. and totally accepting it. And I'm like, okay, this is cool.
Right. That's okay. That's pretty. That's interesting. And so then, like, what do you like? It still happens, right? Those feelings, and then you kind of know that the reenactment of something in the past is about to take place.
Yeah, it feels like I'm in a movie, like
Right.
as if everything becomes way more surreal than it normally is. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And there's this overwhelming feeling of everything is how it's supposed to be. Like,
Right.
it reassures me that everything's going as it should. And I've rarely ever had, times in my life where I'm like, oh, everything's off the rails. Like, I don't know, who am I supposed to be? Where am I supposed to go? I've always had some sort of plan in the back of my mind. Like, well,
Hmm.
I'm just going to trust in my inner knowing or whatever. And whatever thought pops into my mind that I should do, it'll happen and it will be exactly what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, I definitely I know that feel. I've had many instances personally also that it kind of just felt like the only word that comes to mind is like this divine orchestration, you could say, where it just feels like
Yeah.
everything just kind of, you know, is part of this big play, and everyone has their roles, everyone has their actions, their cause and effect ultimately, and it's all kind of leading somewhere. And whenever I feel into where it's leading, it is a place of immense love. Basically, it's that's how I feel about it. It just yeah,
Yeah. Same
it's like
here.
this is where I want to go, like, and it's where I'm going because
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
orchestration. So
Yeah.
that's pretty nice that you have that kind of that reassurance ultimately because it leads into a feeling of trust. And because I know that I don't know about you, but I do sometimes have these doubts that kind of creep into to my mind and like these fears. But whenever I get in tune with that feeling of trust and then that feeling of gratitude for being part of this orchestra, these doubts and these worries they kind of just dissipate, and it's like, no, this is this is just my mind like kind of trying to hold on to something that's not real, because what is real is that it's all part of a greater picture that we're not necessarily consciously aware of at all times, but it's present. It does exist, and we are part of it. So it's a really
Yeah.
nice feeling.
Exactly.
It's a really nice feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. That doubt, it never lasts long because I always fall back on that divine orchestra and I'm like, oh, no, everything's good. Don't worry about it. And, you know,
Yeah.
I,
Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
I haven't only had predictions that pertain to my life directly. I've had them about like people's careers
Oh wow.
and who people are gonna marry, uh, which is a big one. Really interesting because I won't tell anybody. It's just I'm like
But
placing
you
bets
know,
or something.
that's so funny. It's like you're just kind of
Yeah,
sneaking into people's life, but without necessarily controlling it. So it's just like,
yeah, yeah. Like I'll be kicked back and I'll be thinking to myself, well, these two, they don't even hang out together or whatever, but I think they're going to get married. And then like 5 years will go by and sure enough, they're married of kids.
wow, interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. I've had them about celebrities too.
Really.
I don't know where you want to go with the interview, but we could go that
Anything
way
you
if
want
you
to
want.
share, like anything, because honestly, all of this is part of what I want to share with people. So it's like just these examples of the fact that there is more to this world than physical world, because clearly if you just look at the physical world, it's not really possible for you to have a dream about something or to have these precognition moments and then it happens. There's not really anything tangible that can explain that. So anything that you want to share, I'm all ears.
Yeah. All right. So I'll let you choose which one. So
Okay.
have you ever heard of the artist Camila Cabello?
I have not.
Okay. What about Poppy?
I have not. I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
like
Uh, okay. So Camila Cabello is this Latino singer who's pretty popular in America.
okay.
And when I was about, I'd say 7 or 8, I had a series of dreams that took place in my kitchen. And
Okay.
there, they'd be about a different person each time. One of them featured her. And I remember seeing this album and the cover of the album, and the artist was Fifth Harmony. And at the time, I was like, okay, this is an album and this is the name of the artist or group. And okay. And then I saw another album that was like red and black uh, for Camilla, and it said romance on it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take a note of that or whatever. And sure enough, down the road, I don't know how long later on, it was like 15 years later, she was part of this group called Fifth Harmony
Right.
and came out with a solo album called Romance.
Right.
And these were just predictions that I kept to myself. I'd write them down. I wouldn't tell anybody. I was just waiting for them to happen. And when they would happen, I'd be like, whoa, that's crazy. I'd tell some people, and, I'm not like expecting them to believe me or forcing them or anything like that. And some people do believe me and trust me, and then others are like, "Oh, you're deranged and you're out of your mind."
Right.
So, you know, it's like the fear of rejection with anything in life. You risk it, and
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's pretty interesting how it's like how random it kind of seems to be, right? So now I'm wondering
Yeah,
if there's anything kind of like major that, or I mean, who that's relative. I get that, but like something that you would consider kind of more impactful, like something that had really like a deep kind of profound impact on your life or on someone else's life when you like predicted it or when you foresaw it.
okay. Um, this one I think was very significant to me, and I've never been able to ask her, if it felt significant or not to her. But
Okay.
another situation that I wound up in was back when I was 15. It was February of 2007. My great aunt in Boston passed away, Boston, Massachusetts.
Yep.
So we're planning to go up to her funeral the following week or so later. And the night before, we were going to go to the funeral and then go out to this restaurant. I had this dream that we were at a restaurant and sitting with my whole family, and I'm all the way at the left hand of the table, this big rectangular table.
Yep.
And all the seats are taken except for one seat right in front of me. So I'm sitting there, everybody's talking and whatnot. And my attention becomes magnetically drawn to this girl sitting with her father about like 15 feet away. at a table.
Right. Okay.
And no matter what I did, I just kept looking over there. And I'm like, I need to talk to these people, but how do I do it?
Like on the
So
other side
I
of the
had
table.
more,
Yeah.
yeah, I had more balls when I was younger with this sort of thing. But I just full trust got up, walked over there. I said, hey, my name's Daniel. Uh, you can come over to my table and hang out with me if you want. And then I just looked at both of them and walked away. Sure enough, like 2 to 5 minutes later, she walks over and sits down at the only empty seat directly in front of me. My
Nice.
grandma saw the whole thing happening and was like, what is going on? So my grandma like steps in, like, oh, is Daniel being like out of his mind or something? And she goes, hey, yeah, this is Daniel. We're from New Jersey when we came up here. And she's like, oh, okay. I'm from Whitman, Massachusetts. And she introduces herself as like, my name is Mariah Pereira and whatnot. And we were like, oh, okay. And we're sitting there and she seemed happy to be hanging out with me. She was smiling and whatnot. And was asking her just random questions and like, what's your favorite color? She's like, blue. And I was like, oh, okay. And at one point, I randomly thought about my friend back in my hometown named Keith.
Hmm.
And I don't know why I was thinking about him. It just, his name had significance for some reason. And I'm like, I don't really know why I'm thinking about him. So I'll touch on that a little bit later on in the story. But
Yeah.
I look at Mariah and the conversation was getting kind of awkward because I wasn't saying anything, but I was having these visions and I was analyzing them and whatnot, but not really saying anything at first. So I have this vision of her as a singer, but she has platinum blonde hair. And at the time, she only had brown hair. So I was like, that doesn't make sense. Why is she like that? It's weird. So I asked her, hey, Mariah, do you want to be a singer? And she goes, no, I don't. I want to be a dancer. So I said, well, I think that you're going to be a singer. And she looked at me like, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to be a dancer. Like, screw you, Dan. So I'm thinking about that a little bit and whatnot. And I don't think we said much else. And she pulled out her phone and I was like, hey, do you have a phone? And she was like, no, all sarcastically because she was holding one.
Right.
And I forget, I don't think I was thinking to myself, oh, I should, get a notebook and a pen and write down her number and stay in touch with her because that'd be cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I did for whatever reason. I was just awkward or something like that. Or maybe I did ask her and was like, oh, hey, uh, can I have your number? And maybe she rejected me or something. I forget exactly what happened in that part,
Okay.
but I could see why she would because it was sort of this whole like random awkward situation. But
Yeah.
anyway, we leave and she's like, I don't even think I said bye, but we're getting up and she's staring at me like, why aren't you like asking me, to stay in touch or something? And dopey me just took off. So I never saw her again. And then fast forward to 2015 or 2016.
Okay.
I I'm at work. I'm working at this gas station at the time, and I'm on my phone. And I start looking at these Instagram videos of this girl named Poppy, and she's making these like weird, eccentric videos of her like dancing around with mop creatures and like eating a banana and talking in this weird monotone voice. And I'm like, this is weird. And she's this girl with long blonde platinum hair, platinum blonde. So I'm like, oh, this is weird. But she felt really familiar. I'm like, this is strange. And I was watching her videos on and off. And then I saw one video of her where she's playing a guitar and performing a little bit. And I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. And a little while after, I discovered that she was also a singer. And I decided to look her up. I looked her up on Wikipedia because she was pretty good at the time. She had a pretty strong following on YouTube,
Yeah.
like hundreds of thousands of views. So I look her up and I look her up her name and whatnot. And sure enough, it's Mariah Pereira. And she was born and raised in Whitman, Massachusetts. So I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's the same girl. And was like, wow, I should have kept in touch with her. That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But I have often thought to myself, like, oh, well, I wonder if that had any significance to her when we met. If she ever thought back on it and was like, "Whoa, what
It's the
that
moment that
Daniel
defined
fella
her
said." I,
career, maybe.
yeah, but over the course of the years between that and afterwards, I had other dreams about going to her concerts
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
what the venue looked like, and I wound up at the same places, and like I had a dream I went to her album signing and whatnot. And I actually did do that. I went and it was at the same place and stuff. So that was cool. But yeah, I thought that was pretty significant.
That is pretty significant, and indeed. And you mentioned something about Keith, and you said he would come back at a later point in this.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I saw an interview of her. I was doing a little bit of research or something, and they brushed up on her father in one of these interviews. And her father is also a musician who has a band, and his name is Keith.
Okay.
So it made sense. Like, oh, okay,
I see.
well
I see
that
what you mean. Yeah,
there's
yeah.
Keith. Yeah, and oddly enough, after that initial meeting, about like 3 months later, I had another dream, weird dream about seeing her father, and it was really short. The father just said to me, "Hey, Daniel, you should check out my band on MySpace. It's called Sirenic." And that was it. The next day, I was feverishly trying to find this band on MySpace. I could not find it. But then, years later, when I discovered his name and, he was their father and whatnot, they mentioned the band that he played in, Sirenic, and I saw how it was spelled and that I was misspelling it horribly, and that's why I couldn't find it. But like, just very, very. So I was having this, I guess you could call it like subconscious or spiritual communication with him in this dream.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And when it comes to like the story about the woman who became a singer, it's kind of interesting how it showed up to you. Is like you were talking and you initially had this feeling that she was significant, and then you saw that, and then ultimately it happened, right? So, because the reason I am saying this right now is because it kind of reminds me a bit of something that I do. I'm actually starting right now to develop clairvoyant abilities myself, and it's kind of strange every time that it happens, but I'm doing it purposely though. It's like it doesn't really come randomly. I get into a
Mm-hmm.
meditative space, and the kind of technique that I do is I bring up a hologram, which is like you could say an empty vessel, an empty body, that I then link
Yeah,
to the person that I'm working on. I kind of just imagine that person, I dissolve that person into particles of light, and then I link that up with the hologram so that then I work on the hologram, and it's like what I do on the hologram happens to the person in the quantum field. And I always get the
yeah,
consent from the person beforehand, and I set the intention for the highest and best. But then I ask a question, and that question is, please show me something that I don't know to facilitate the healing of this wonderful human being. And when I say that question, there's always a bunch of random stuff that I see. And it, at first, to me, every time I would do it, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. But then a few times it happened where I saw something about the person that turned out to be tangible. Like, for example, there's this woman that had spots all over her body when I saw like the hologram. The hologram was kind of covered in different spots, and then I asked the question, and after I explained to her at the end of the healing what happened, she told me that she was covered in mosquito bites at the moment. So it's kind of
Oh wow.
pretty interesting. I didn't know that prior, so that was quite just it's kind of small, but at the same time it's pretty mind blowing to me. And then, but it doesn't stop there even because when I did the clearing, I cleared these spots, but there's one place in her body that just it wouldn't clear, and it was on her right arm. There was this like deep like the spot just did not want to be cleared up ultimately. And when I explained that to her, she's like, "Wow, that's so interesting because it just so happens that I have a scar there that's been there for many, many years from a self-inflicted wound when I was a rebellious teenager." So that's
Oh
like,
wow.
yeah, exactly, right? So it's why I'm saying like these things are very interesting, but it seems to me that because I've never had, at least not that I consciously remember of, like visions about someone else that just happened out of the blue. So, but when I do get into that space, I can kind of tap into something that seems to be tangible. So why I bring this up is that maybe it would be something that you can start, like trying or practicing of like consciously or intentionally trying to tap into someone else's field or someone else's energy and see what you can see about them. And maybe you could use that to help them.
Oh yeah. I have done that. It just seems to be I'm more inclined or naturally drawn to do it with people that I believe I had a past life with
Okay.
and I knew them. That's why I'm drawn because there's this familiarity and whatnot. But yeah, no, I have done psychic readings, free and paid, where I'll take on anybody. And who knows? Maybe the people who are my customers I do in a past life. But yeah, seemingly
Right.
random people, and I'll eh, get a read on their current state and where it's going or whatnot. And I've had both people who I can feel to be normal, and then I've had people who I can feel are like pathological liars,
Okay.
or they're too like arrogant to believe the truth if they were to hear it and whatnot. And
Mm.
like there's been times where somebody will ask about like the boyfriend or something, and I'll be like, oh yeah, uh, he's not faithful or something like that, and they don't want to believe me. And then I'll like describe who the other person is, and they're like, oh no, well he's never done that before or whatever. And then like not too long after, they'll come back and say, oh yeah, no, you were right. uh, but like they don't want to believe it at the time.
Right.
I'll it's like I'll word things in a certain way, and they're like, oh no. Oh, there was one particular instance where the father of her kid, who she wasn't together with, the kid uh, didn't really want to be with her and wanted to be with the father or whatever. And I said that, and she's like, no, no, that's not true. And then I was like, then what's the problem? And she was like, oh, well, the kid keeps going with the father. And I was like, well, isn't that what I just said? Like a lot of the times people just don't want to hear it at first.
Right.
And then you have to really like paint it out and be like, well, that's exactly what I just said. So, but nah, yeah, I've helped people out with that sort of thing. I don't do it that much anymore just because I work another job, and
Okay.
you know, I, the psychic stuff wasn't paying my bills or anything. It was more like
Yeah.
charity work. I was doing it, just because I wanted to.
Right. Yeah, I know that feeling. Interesting. So I guess I think my last question here would be, we can kind of dwell a bit deeper into that, but what do you feel is happening? Like how what do you feel is the working of this ability that you have? Like, do you have a bit of an explanation as to why this occurs? Why you have you kind of come to an understanding of these kind of questions?
Oh, okay. So, oh, you mean with the predictions or
Well, with everything
just,
that's, yeah, like either the predictions, the dreams, the psychic abilities, like just what do you feel
oh,
is
okay.
how does that work?
So this is my philosophy is that you die. Where do you go? I believe you go to some sort of, not purgatory, but some sort of like zone. Have you ever played like GTA? You can run around and do things. I think it's
Yeah, I
sort of
know
like
about it.
that. You're in this like free zone, but it's like you can choose to do like whatever you want, and there's people who you're familiar with, their souls, I guess you could say, or spirits. It's not like a video game, but it could be like a video game.
Who knows,
But
right?
you know you, you choose to incarnate, and you're like, okay, I want to do that, and then you like map it out a little bit with the other souls on the other side, like, okay, I'm going to be your son and whatnot, because for whatever reason, I like the way that you raised kids or something. Like, oh, I think you could teach me something about art. Who knows what the reason is? And then, so everything that happens in your life, you're sort of planning from the other side, I believe, along with other people in the planning process. And then you come over here and you don't remember it. And you get these little nudges here and there, like, oh, I should go there, I should do that. And it's like, what's happening is from the other side, you're the other side of you is like puppeting you in a way, like, oh, go there, do that and whatnot. But you're not really like aware of it, because I guess for whatever reason, I mean, if you're saying that to people, they might think you're insane, and then your life would be kind of tough to live.
Right.
You don't want to be that like raging lunatic. You're like, oh, well, I'm doing this because a ghost from beyond the grave is controlling me. They'd be like, okay, let's get you those
Those pills.
sticky socks and put you, yeah, yeah, let's put you in an asylum.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting philosophy. Hmm. I wonder if like maybe these are other aspects of who we are, because I know in my experience that we do work in multiple realities ultimately, multiple places at once, and so
Yeah.
maybe one of them is actually that planification of like what you described could be happening right now, like in real time. Who knows? It's pretty
So
interesting.
I, I have a little bit of proof of that, at
Okay.
least from my perspective. So, like I talked about, like Bart Simpson and stuff. When I was a kid, I used to tell my parents that my name was Bartholomew for some reason. And they're like, oh, whatever. Dan, you're just, whatever. You're just playing around. And I stopped. I said it like twice, and then I stopped. I never said it again. And then down the road, I had this psychic friend, and out of the blue, she goes, "Oh, Dan, want me to look up your soul name for you?" And I was like, "Okay, why not? It's free, and you're just gonna do it." So she looked it up, and she was like, "Oh, your name is Bartholomew." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird because I used to call myself that as a
Hmm.
child." And so that was weird. And then I was dating this one girl, and my psychic friend looked up her name, and it was Abigail, which
Okay.
was strange. And this was a really weird situation that happened. I was at work and I was working at a gas station. A customer comes up and the guy's name is Bart. And I was like, oh, that's funny. That's like my name, sort of. And then he left. And the very next girl who came up, her name was Abigail.
Abigail.
And I was
Well,
like, oh, well, that's weird because my psychic friend just, told me that all that info. So, I could look at that and be like, well, that's a sign. So I'll
hmm.
accept it.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing all these stories. Do you feel completed? Is there something else you would like to share before we go? Any kind of thing that you feel would be important for people to hear?
Um, I believe that you should always trust your inner knowing. And no matter what your parents say or whoever says, if you are totally committed to doing something within reason, you're not going to jump off the Grand Canyon or anything, but anything that makes sense to you, then do it. Because look, I'm not going to get into it too much, but I've had dreams of being somewhere, and one of the things I did was when I moved out to Los Angeles, the person I was going to live with, he just the day of me going out there, he goes, "Oh, it's going to be inconvenient." But I said, "Fuck it." I went out there. I slept in my truck for a month, and I ended up meeting people, that I had dreams about, and it all worked out for some reason.
Wow.
But just trust your inner knowing and just go with it because I don't know. But then again, I don't think it's that black and white because some people have like mental illnesses and stuff, so their inner knowing of robbing the local McDonald's might be,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
like we have to have discernment of what the actual inner knowing is, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, but yeah, you get the picture.
yeah, I do. And I definitely agree. Like many times in my life, I've had these inner knowings of like change of plans and not going the direction that I had thought I was gonna go. And although it didn't really always lead to immediate kind of benefits or immediate understanding as to why I chose to do this, it in the end it always did. Like there was always at some point like a realization of like, oh, now I see why I went to Indonesia. Now I see why I decided to stay in Vilcabamba. Like these things, right? It's like in retrospect, I understood why this inner knowing was present and ultimately how
Mm-hmm.
it led me to be to be who I really am, to be the most authentic version of myself I can be, which I feel is something that's very important for us to just discover who we really are.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's how you live your best life.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for being here, Dan. It was amazing talking to you. And
You're welcome.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to that in the future and find something that's meaningful to them that they can apply to their life by just hearing what we had this little sharing here. And so we're contributing to people's like best lives as we speak. So thank you for
Yeah,
being you ultimately. Thank you for being you.
you're
Eh, and
you're
enjoy the
welcome,
rest
Alex.
of your day.
You're welcome. I'm gonna go take a nap.